Oh, Captain, my Captain. Yes, the famous lines from Dead Poet Society. And if you can't tell, I'm old because you probably don't get that reference. But I'm Josh Hudson, and I'm the captain now. No, I'm kidding. It's that guy, Austin Amandolia. He is our DFS guy over here at Club Fantasy, not to be confused with Kelly Singh, who you will also find over here on Club Fantasy and Women of Fantasy Football. But Austin, how are you doing tonight? We are going to be talking showdown slates, and I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's playoff wildcard weekend, super wildcard weekend is, I guess, how we brand it now. It's time for some good playoff games, and I think we actually have some good games on the slate this year. Past couple of years, the wildcard round has been kind of meh. But I'm looking forward to this weekend.
Yeah, it should be fun. You would think that you would get good matchups because it's the playoffs, right? But yeah. Lot of great narratives with these. And the one that we're starting with today, the Cleveland Browns versus the Houston Texans. And this would be made oh so much sweeter if Deshaun Watson were playing. But honestly, I'm kind of happy he's not, because it's been so much better watching Joe Flacco at quarterback this week or this season. Excuse me.
Yeah. Plus, I can actually stand and watch the games now. It's great. It's best of both worlds.
We'll lead this segment off by fuck Deshaun Watson. But as you go through these segments, you will see these are short videos, about 10, 15 minutes likely, and we're going to cover all of the different playoff games, focusing on the showdown slates. So we'll talk potential captains, how to fill out the rest of the lineup, and then, of course, the punt plays, people we want to stay away from, etc. This video is going to be the Cleveland Browns versus the Houston Texans. We're also going to have the Dolphins versus the Chiefs, the Packers versus the Cowboys, the Rams versus the Lions, and of course, my Philadelphia Eagles dragging ass into the playoffs against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So with that, a friendly reminder that you can play these showdown slates with us.
Yes, you can play these with us. We're going to be having contest for the Dolphins versus Chiefs game on Saturday night, for the Rams-Lions game on Sunday night, and the Philadelphia Tampa Bay game on Monday night. And Josh, you're gonna love that one because we're gonna pick on your Eagles a little bit when we talk about that one. But you can
I live in the Tampa Bay area. I could very easily go to this game. You could not pay me to go watch the Eagles play this week. Like it's unfathomable how bad they've been. I also want to point out Steelers versus Bills. Completely forgot about that one, so that'll be fun. Anyway, let's get into the first little mini segment here. This is Captain Chalk, because again, we're going with the pirate ship captain theme for these. The Captain Chalk is very simple. This is the chalky captain play that we know everybody is likely to pick because they are that damn good. And Austin, while this guy missed the last couple weeks of the season, a couple weeks prior to that, he was that damn good.
Yeah, so Amari Cooper is probably going to be the most popular captain on the slate for this matchup. The last time we saw him play, he scored 50 points, and it was against this very same Houston Texans defense. The one thing that we have learned about Joe Flacco over the past 4 weeks, too, is that he can find his number one target. He knows where his bread gets buttered, and it's been through Amari Cooper. So I imagine him to be heavily played. The decision you have to make is whether you want to play the chalk or move off of it. In small field tournaments, I may stick with Amari Cooper. I'll probably have at least one lineup with Cooper in it, but I will also be getting some shares of other folks in the captain slot to get different. But Cooper, it's hard to go wrong with him right now, the way he's playing.
Yeah, and while Cooper is probably the likeliest of captains, he's not the most expensive on this slate. That would be CJ Stroud, who happened to have missed the previous game between these two during week 16. But speaking of other captains, the Mutineer, this next segment here, this is going to be the Contrarian Captain choice that offers a little bit of variety and some upside in some of these larger tournament fields. And Austin, you have a couple guys, one from each team, and I'm really curious to hear some reasoning between these two guys.
Yeah, so first off, we have David Njoku. It's pretty rare that I'll put a tight end in the captain slot because it's just hard to be optimal that way with most tight ends. Like, you think your typical fantasy tight end that you're praying that they get in the end zone, they're not going to give you the upside you need to win with them in your captain slot. But when a tight end is being treated like a wide receiver, the way that David Njoku is, it becomes a viable target because the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 2 options on their respective teams tend to have actually very similar correlation in relation to how they perform in showdown lineups and optimizing showdown lineups. And David Njoku is the wide receiver 2 for all intents and purposes. Since week 15, he has a 27% target share in this offense, which is wild for a tight end. So I feel comfortable with him as a tight end or as my captain this week, even though he is a tight end. And then on the other side of the ball, I am a fan of Devin Singletary. And this is contrarian not only because you're picking a player from the team that's not favored. The Texans are 4-point underdogs. It's also contrarian because you're picking a different game script than what many are going to expect for this game. Because of the way we've seen CJ Stroud and Joe Flacco throw the ball around, it seems likely that this game hits the over. The line's at like 44.5 right now. But Cleveland has struggled against the run game recently and down the stretch. And so if Devin Singletary just gets like 25 touches and gets in the end zone a couple of times, he could easily be the highest scoring player in this game. And it could be a strategy the Texans play to keep the ball out of the Cleveland Browns' hands.
Yeah, Singletary, 9 carries, 44 yards, and I believe 3 receptions during that Week 16 game. Probably not as many carries because of the game script. Joe Flacco threw for 388 yards. But you mentioned the defenses. These are 2 pretty solid defenses. Yes, Cleveland has given up a lot more against the run to close out the season this year. But overall, they've been a very good defense, and they generate a lot of sacks as well, which is going to keep CJ Stroud busy. But if you're able to run the ball effectively, that essentially negates that pass rush. And the Cleveland defense is, like I said, they've brought it. They have 11 sacks over the last 4 weeks. They have 6 interceptions over those same 4 weeks. CJ Stroud hasn't thrown near the types of interceptions that you typically see from rookies. I believe only 5 interceptions on the season. So, yeah, if they can flip the script a little bit, and this being a home game for them, which it was before, it's going to be a little interesting to see if they can essentially neutralize Cooper and Flacco. And as I mentioned, Flacco did throw 2 interceptions. Derek Stingley, who likely will see a lot of Amari Cooper, did have one of those interceptions in that game. So, yeah, very curious to see how this plays out. Love the Njoku pivot as well. 6 for 44 and a touchdown in the first meeting. All right, next segment here. The first mate. Because every captain needs a reliable crew. So if you're starting with your said captain, let's see how we're going to fill out these spots. A couple of Houston Texans here on your list, Austin.
Yeah, so first off, we have Dalton Schultz, who is one of Stroud's favorite targets and has quietly been a consistent tight end throughout the year. You know, he's been banged up here and there, and so we've seen Brevin Jordan pop off at time. But this one's particularly interesting to me because while Cleveland still has an elite defense, they have struggled against tight ends down the stretch as well. There's that red number 1 next to their name when you go and click Dalton Schultz on the app, because over the season, the Browns have been really stout against tight ends. And so people may not want to play Dalton Schultz. They may get scared off by that red number 1 that says the opponent rank, they're the worst matchup for tight ends. However, since week 14, the Cleveland Browns are allowing the second most points to the tight end position among playoff teams, and they allowed the third most overall compared to all teams down the stretch when you look at all 32 teams. So this is a good plus matchup for Dalton Schultz with the way that the Browns have been playing down the stretch. Similarly, and this is sort of a principle that you can carry out through all of your showdown slates, if you're playing a Texans pass catcher in your captain spot, you probably want to play CJ Stroud as well, just because if the receiver pops off, CJ Stroud is going to as well. But the reason I want to bring up CJ Stroud is because I think he's a good person to have in your lineup, regardless of whether or not your captain is a Houston Texans wide receiver, just because he's going to get the volume most likely. I think if you run this game out in 6 out of 10 scenarios, CJ Stroud is probably passing the ball at least 30 times, and 6 of those 10 times. And so he's going to get the volume. We've seen him play at an elite level. He can get the yardage, the touchdown. So he's going to be sure thing to get you 15 to 20, 25 points no matter what.
I like that. And Nico Collins, his favorite target, just popped off for 9 catches, 195 yards. Nico in that last game only saw 6 targets, but again, dealt with both the second and third string quarterback and not the stud that is CJ Stroud. So with that, we move on to the deck scrubbers. Yes, the deck scrubbers. These are your cheaper punt play options that can make or break a lineup based on one play and limited opportunity. Probably a couple names you're not going to be very familiar with. So Austin, tell us about guys like David Bell, Brevin Jordan, and Xavier Hutchinson.
Yeah, so there are 3 options that I like for this game this week. The first is David Bell, who we saw get 4 catches and 2 touchdowns last week. I doubt he repeats that, but Cedric Tillman is likely out this game. He is in the concussion protocol, and so David Bell will be able to move up into that wide receiver 3 spot behind Cooper and Elijah Moore. And so I expect David Bell to have more of a role given that, and he could easily find his way into the end zone since he'll be on the field more. Similar to the Dalton Schultz point, I have Brevin Jordan in here just because, again, Cleveland struggles against tight end, and you could see Dalton Schultz get a lot of the down-to-down usage, but then Brevin Jordan find his way into the end zone very easily. And if Jordan, gets 3 catches and a touchdown, that's enough for the amount of salary you're paying for him and what it allows you to do the rest of your roster. Also, if this game is pretty low scoring, having Brevin Jordan could be a very interesting contrarian play if he scores a touchdown, because he's going to comparatively score more fantasy points just because he's one of the few players scoring that touchdown. And then the last player I have for this is Xavier Hutchinson, who just saw several targets last week. They were trying to work him into the system last week with Noah Brown out, and it just didn't work out. And there was, I think he even got an end zone target. I know because I had him played. I think this game was also on one of the small slates last weekend on Saturday, and I had Xavier Hutchinson in one of my lineups, and he almost got into the end zone and just didn't quite make it there. I probably won't play a ton of him, but if you're wanting to get a little bit more creative, I think he's a fine option to put in at least one lineup.
Yeah, Hutchinson has 15 targets over the last 5 weeks. Obviously, we know the wide receiver core in Houston is very banged up, and it's been banged up all season. It feels like a different wide receiver pops every single week. We saw even John Mechie getting some targets last week. Both of those guys are starting to run a lot more routes. Mechie, it seems like they're finally starting to transition him back more towards running on the outside, which is actually where he excelled at Alabama. So if he's finally starting to get into game shape, who knows? Maybe we could be on the verge of a John Mechie breakout game too.
Yeah, I like the John Mechie play. And whenever I was thinking about who to play, I was choosing between John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson because they're both 2 receivers that are likely to benefit from the absence of Noah Brown. I think if you're in a larger field tournament, Xavier Hutchinson is the smarter game theory play because fewer people are going to want to play him. More people are going to be excited about the John Mechie breakout. But in smaller tournaments, John Mechie is a fine option.
100%. All right, one more time, we're going to remind everybody that you all can play these DFS showdowns against us, both on DraftKings and on FanDuel. The links will be in the description on the YouTube video, so feel free to click on those and play against myself and Austin and maybe Kelly and Ryan and a few other people from the Club Fantasy team. But with that reminder, we're going to come up to our final segment here. And if the captain is the hero, every hero needs a villain. And in the world of the sea, that villain is the Kraken. These are the lineup traps that will ultimately sink the ship. And we'd all love the Elijah Moore talk because he fills in so admirably for Amari Cooper. But Austin, I think Elijah Moore is kind of a bit of a Kraken this week.
Yeah, I think he is. I've wanted Elijah Moore to be a thing this year so many times for DFS, and it just hasn't worked. He's not getting enough volume, and there's no upside there. He's not getting used down the field. He's getting these like gimmicky plays close to the line of scrimmage. So even when he's getting opportunities, they're not high upside. or high efficiency opportunities for him to score a ton of fantasy points on. So I think he's a trap to have in your lineup. Similarly, I think Robert Woods is a trap. You may be tempted to go after him if Noah Brown sits out. I just rather go with one of the options we discussed earlier with Xavier Hutchinson, or to lean into the tight ends. I think Robert Woods, he's been reliable to catch like 2 or 3 catches in a game, but that's about it. He doesn't have a ton of upside. So for the price that he's at 5,200 on DraftKings. I'd rather look elsewhere for someone that has more upside.
All right. Now, I know this wasn't brought up in the show sheet. We didn't really talk about this pre-show. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here, Austin.
Okay.
All these players and positions you mentioned, not a single kicker, not a single defense. Is there a strategy for why that is, or is it just not in the cards in this particular matchup?
Yeah, I honestly tend to devalue kickers and defenses in showdown slates because it has to be a very specific game script that goes right for having them in your lineup to be an optimal outcome. I think there is a potential for, if you want to bet on the Texans getting a defensive touchdown, or similarly with the Browns, you can make that bet. I think this game is most likely trending towards the over in my mind. And so the defenses sort of scare me on that front. Like, they can make splash plays, but defenses, the whole time they just get negative. They get fewer and fewer points unless some outlier performance happens. So I'm very reticent to have them as a key piece of my lineup. The kickers in this game, I am a little more interested in. I'm interested in Kaimi Fairbairn just because the Cleveland Browns defense is tough and they could stop the Texans, take that bend not break mentality, and Fairbairn can provide enough points in that pathway. But usually that's like the last decision I'm making is whether or not I want to have a kicker or defense. And it just really depends on game context.
So I remember you talking about with Devin Singletary specifically, how he could be valuable in a game script that flips. I would say that if you're willing to start and put Devin Singletary in your lineup, Fairbairn is a great pairing for those two, simply for that reason. So with that, that's all she wrote. The captain sings, or the fat lady, or whatever, however you want to end this shit. This has been Oh Captain, My Captain. I'm Josh Hudson. That is Austin Amandolia. You can find these short little videos on our YouTube page. That is at Club Fantasy FFL. Feel free to hit the like. It costs you literally nothing. Does everything to help us. Hit that subscribe. Also, costs you nothing. Does everything to help us. We greatly appreciate it. You can find anything and everything that Austin is working on at www.clubfantasyffl.com. But also, Austin is now writing with Last Word on Sports, I believe. Yes?
Yes, that's correct. I am writing all Carolina Panthers talk on them. So had an article come out today on, well, not today. I had an article come out recently on the Scott Fitterer firing, and will soon be ranking the 9 candidates for the Panthers head coach job.
There you go. Signing off. Setting sail. I got to come up with more captain metaphors as we outro these videos. But until then, we'll talk next time.